I'm just making this short video about, well, basically it's focusing first on this news story from the Mirror. It's a very sad story in which Geraldine Newman, a mum and her 2 children, were murdered by her ex-partner. And reading through the story, we find out that after he'd murdered his family, the father then drove and threw himself off a cliff. And we also discover that Geraldine was actually very, very badly beaten to the point that she was nearly dead by this man. And on leaving hospital, she took him back into the family home. And apparently just not long before she was murdered, she'd sent a friend a text saying, "I'm scared and I don't know what to do." So this was the lady. She was actually the main breadwinner. She was the breadwinner, the family breadwinner, and she was a very lovely person. She did a lot of work for charity. She worked hard all her life, and you can see her, both the children are so beautiful, and she was such a lovely person. And it's a very, very sad loss to Britain that we've lost this wonderful member of our community, of our British society, and her 2 beautiful children as well have just been wasted by this crazy man that she unfortunately fell in love with and married. Now, the first thing also that I want to explain as well, that it isn't just women that are suffering this. There are a percentage of men who are suffering this type of violence as well, especially, and even people, men and women, in the same sex partnerships. So, you know, this is a problem of consciousness. It's a problem of our British social consciousness, and we need to address it. I grew up in a violent home. My mum wasn't violent. Again, she was like Geraldine. She was the breadwinner. She worked. It was our dad who was a violent alcoholic, and obviously mentally ill. And so the police did very, very little to help us. And I did feel quite angry towards my mum for quite some time, because she stayed with him, or she kept having him back, you know. I mean, in those days it was a lot more difficult to leave, and, you know, and as a child you don't understand those kind of things. But as I grew up, I did understand, you know, my mum's reasons. But obviously in these days, you know, you look at this lady Geraldine, she had the finance, the ability to be independent, and yet somehow she felt she really needed this violent, horrible man in her life. But that's the thing, you see, is that these kind of people that become violent enough to seriously harm and kill people, they're not just they aren't evil people. You know, they have a nice side to them. Like the neighbour said, this man stayed home, he looked after his children, he appeared as a doting father, and he probably was, but he just had these moments of madness, you see. And obviously Geraldine saw the nice side of him. That's the part she fell in love with. Now, the thing is that people who form these type of partnerships with people that have this abusive, very aggressive side to them, a lot of them do suffer from Stockholm syndrome. And this article, I'll leave you the links, explain what Stockholm syndrome is, and You know, people are often amazed at their own psychological conditions. Those with depression are stunned when they remember they've thought of killing themselves. Patients recovering from severe psychiatric disturbances are often shocked as they remember their symptoms and behaviour during the episode. A patient with bipolar disorder recently told me, "I can't believe that I could change the weather through mental telepathy." A common reaction is, "I can't believe I did that." So, Stockholm Syndrome relates to an incident in 1973 in which a bank, gun-carrying criminals, entered a Swiss bank, a Swedish bank in Stockholm, and they held captive some of the bank employees, and later on some of the captors were actually the hostages were protecting their captors, and some of them even paid for a legal defence fund for them as well, you know. So it was understood, you know, psychologists studied this, and they realised that emotionally bonding with an abuser is actually a strategy for survival for victims of abuse and intimidation. The Stockholm Syndrome reaction in hostage and or abuse situations is so well recognised at this time that policed hostage negotiators no longer view it as unusual. Right, so I wanted to make that point that we know there is a psychological condition called Stockholm Syndrome, and that you cannot rely on the victim to support a case against the abuser. Okay, so in this lady's case, Geraldine, when she was first nearly battered to death by her husband, okay, he should have been in jail, regardless of what she said. No matter what she said, he should have been put in jail because he nearly killed a person. He brutally attacked and battered a person. The fact that that was his partner makes the crime even worse. Okay, because he's battered his children's mother, and they've had to witness her. Okay, so regardless of what she says, she has become temporarily mentally ill. That's what the police have to understand legally and professionally. You know, as a psychologist, as expert psychologist, understands that this woman who wants to stand up for her partner who's nearly killed her and denied her children a mother, okay, she wants him back in the family home. No, sorry, darling, that is not going to happen. He's going to jail and he's going to receive serious therapy, and he's never going to step foot in your home again. And if you let him in your home, you're putting your children at risk, because you will be encouraging him to repeat patterns that he has to learn how to break. So no, he can't see the children unless supervised, and he's not allowed back in your home no matter what you say. That is the way it has to be. We need to stop leaving it up to the abused victims as to whether or not somebody goes to jail or not. Now, if me or you went out on the street and just battered somebody to death for no reason, because these people that do this type of thing, and as I say, it's not just men, there are women as well, but it is mostly men, and we have to accept that it's mostly men. Okay, that sorry, you've battered somebody. Doesn't matter who it is, whether they want to press charges or not. You are a dangerous person. You are going to be removed out of society, and you're going to receive some form of treatment, therapy, and before you are released back into society, we will do our best to make sure you are not going to repeat that kind of violence against anybody ever again. And no, you can never go back to your partner, because you have crossed a line that can never ever be broken again. Okay, you can never step over that line again, because there's a pattern there, and that would be the very worst thing that you could do is to go back to a partner that you've been operating a pattern of abuse in. Okay. And so, people don't understand, and I've experienced it myself with my own family. A family member was very hospitalised, nearly died again. As the doctors said, one more kick and she'll be dead, and he got community service. And that person was only saved because neighbours actually smashed a window to get into the house to stop him from actually killing her. And he got a few months community service. She stood up for him in court, and he went back into the family home. And, they are split up after years and years more abuse and horror that she suffered as a result. And at the time, myself and other family members were dismayed. There was nothing we could do. We know that she's suffering from Stockholm syndrome. She still is, and nothing's been done to help her. It's like Stockholm syndrome doesn't really exist, and the police would rather rely on a Stockholm syndrome victim to allow a violent, aggressive person to remain walking around in British society, who could go and meet another person, have more children, and cause more horror. And, I'm not making this because I want to have a go at these violent men. A lot of these men need help, and they've suffered violence themselves, and we have to understand that. This isn't about hatred, it's about sorting out a problem and not allowing it to keep replicating. So you have children that are growing up in these violent, aggressive households, and they're being imprinted with that kind of behaviour. And unfortunately, these two beautiful children have not survived. And this is one family too many. Okay, if it's just one family, it's one family too many. But it's not just one family. Hundreds of thousands of families are suffering domestic violence. 2 women are killed every week in England and Wales by a current or former partner. 1 woman killed every 3 days. Okay, that's the national statistics for 2015. 1 woman killed every 3 days. So 2 are killed by partners, and another woman is just killed by an angry man that wants to kill a woman. 1 in 4 women in England and Wales will experience domestic violence in their lifetimes, and 8% will suffer domestic violence in any given year. So let's have a look. What does 80% mean in a country of 70 million? What does 8% mean in a country of 70 million people? And there you go. 5,600,000 women and their children, therefore, a week are suffering domestic violence. That's a serious proportion of people. And they are the reported cases. Most of the cases are never reported. So the figure is probably a lot higher. And, as I say, it's not just women, male victims of domestic violence. Because this situation that we seem to have in Britain, where there's so much domestic violence going on in the family homes, obviously you're going to have violent women as well. You're going to have women that grow up, females that grow up hating men in exactly the same way. You get men who grow up hating women. And, this is a story about a centre that was set up to try and help men and give them therapy. And it does work, and I think that is what we need to do, For example, a men's centre in Kentish Town was set up 3 decades ago. And it did help people. But you see, nobody really wants to listen to Adam Dukes. He's the psychotherapist who wrote Is There a Cure for Masculinity? And, you know, he's written a lot of books about this problem, you know, why men hate women. But unfortunately, you know, nobody's really listening. And you have to ask yourself, well, you know, why? Why is it that these crimes within the family are not treated seriously? They're not addressed. And instead, you know, usually the most that happens is that children are taken away and separated and handed over into state care, where they suffer, probably a lot of them, even worse abuse and suffering. So, you know, nothing really is being done to stop it. It's like, yeah, well, that's what happens, isn't it? You know, men beat the wives up, or, you know, and yeah, they get a couple of women a week get killed. We'll just live with that. That's the cost of our society. It's an unbearable cost. It's an unbearable cost. And as I say, I really feel for Geraldine's family, especially because I know how they would have felt when she took him back, and how helpless they would have all felt about it. And as I say, you know, I'm sorry. I think it's disgusting that British authorities are permitting the psychologically damaged victims of abuse to protect people with serious mental health problems. Violent, aggressive people with mental health problems. She has been protecting the whole of society from that man for how many years? Because if his violence and aggression wasn't going to erupt out on her, it would have erupted out on somebody like the one woman a week who gets killed in Britain by a man who just hates women. There'd be a lot more of them, of those type of killings. So, you know, we have to do something about it. We have to accept that this country is raising violent and aggressive people. Why? We need to ask ourselves that. Why? What is it about our society that makes the home one of the most dangerous places for children, the family home? We need to ask that question. Because it is intolerable to live with. And, you know, as I say, until the British courts, you know, it's a well-known syndrome. Stockholm syndrome is a well-known psychological condition. So until the courts stop allowing victims of spousal abuse to support their partner, to say, oh, well, it wasn't his fault, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. They should not be heard. Okay? They should not be heard, because they are, if somebody has battered them to the extent that they've been hospitalised, for any degree, whatever extent they've been hospitalised, they should have no say in protecting that person from prosecution. It should be a standard prosecution, the same way it is with the family courts. If you get caught waving at your adopted child, you go to prison for a year. Okay, so you get caught battering your partner to the extent that she's hospitalised, then you are going to go to jail, and you are going to get therapy, and the questions are going to be asked. That's how it has to be, because it's the only way to stop it, and it's the only way to protect the next generation and stop this pattern, stop these patterns of abuse and that for too long men have been able to rely on their victims to support them, and that has to stop. If somebody nearly kills somebody, the fact that that's their partner should weigh even more heavily against them, because it's even worse that somebody has battered their partner, their own partner, and who is a parent to their children as well. So, and I don't care, what, 90% of the time, these women and men who suffer this type of violence, but it's mostly women, as I say, that are killed, they haven't done anything to warrant it, and again, it does not matter what the person has done, what they've said, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, you don't batter somebody to death, or you don't batter somebody that badly, or you don't batter people. That is not an answer, is it, to dealing with anything. No matter what your partner's done, I can understand some people might, lash out suddenly because they're shocked and they've suddenly discovered something really terrible that the partner's done. But at the end of the day, there is no excuse. We have to have zero tolerance. And as I say, if somebody is battered that badly that they have to go to hospital for whatever reason, even if it's only to have a few stitches because of a cut, it doesn't matter. If they've had to go to hospital for treatment or go to their doctor's surgery, then that person goes to jail, you see. And then that cuts them out of the picture. It allows the family to recover. It allows the mother or the father, whoever's suffered the abuse, to have time themselves to recover, to understand that they're suffering from Stockholm syndrome, and also understand that they are addicted chemically to their partner, you see, because, and that is now another known fact, that there are chemicals released in the human body when we fall in love with somebody, and it is an addiction, and when that person's not there, we miss them in the same way a heroin addict misses heroin. And that's a fact. So, those people need help. People that are suffering Stockholm syndrome, who have suffered serious abuse, they need help to get over their addiction. They need to understand what it is they're experiencing. It isn't because they genuinely love that person, because that person is actually the be-all and end-all of their life. No. They are actually effectively enslaved, chemically enslaved, to loving somebody that isn't actually very good for them. And actually, it's not very good for that person for them to be with somebody that they've abused. Because the one thing that a lot of these women just do not understand, and my sister didn't understand it, my mum, my family, the family member that got nearly killed didn't understand it, is that once somebody's crossed that line and nearly killed you, okay, even if you forgive them, they have not forgiven themselves. Without any therapy or anything, how can they're walking around with the burden of guilt, and no matter how much they try, it just impounds everything. It impounds everything to the extent that the next time, yes, they'll kill. So, as I say, this is one of those stories that people look at, as I say, it's in the Mirror, it's probably not going to be on BBC News. It's one of those stories, oh yeah, isn't it terrible, yeah, 2 women a week get killed by an ex-partner, well, I think it's, as I say, it is intolerable, and as a species living in this nation through time, that we do, then, you know, we need to, as I say, address this now, and we do need to stop it. And I am very, very disturbed as well to see that a lot of women aren't reporting domestic violence because they get the children taken off them by social services. The man does not get arrested for his crimes, or if he does, he doesn't get convicted. Okay, and he's allowed to harass till eventually social says, oh, you know, you can't protect your children from your ex-partner, so we're going to take your children off and forcibly adopt them, give them up for forced adoption to people. So, you know, and that is no answer either, because again, children who suffered and then suddenly they're all separated, suffering even more. It's abominable, absolutely abominable. So, you know, it's time Britain stopped stamping on its women and children and its men who aren't, you know, what you call your alpha male types. And it's time that we gave support to victims of abuse, and also that we, you know, took a crime for what it is, and it does not matter who stands up for that person. If they've battered somebody and nearly killed them, then I'm sorry, you're going to go to jail, and you're going to be incarcerated, and you are going to be receiving therapy, and people are going to be looking at you, questioning you, and trying to find ways of helping you to live a better life as a more caring, compassionate human being. And if that isn't possible, then you're not going to be allowed to walk around in public, and you're not going to be allowed to have any relationships with women or children. That's the way it has to be. So until we have a law that protects women and children and doesn't rely on victims of abuse and the psychological damage that they're suffering to protect those people, you know, nothing is ever going to get any better. So that's all I have to say, and I do hope that people pick up on this, and the families of all the women who've died, you know, I hope that you pick up on this as well and stand up for those women, you know, in the sense of, yes, if they suffer violence, no matter what they say, they're a victim, they're not in their right mind, they've suffered serious trauma abuse in a way that is unimaginable to suffer that from somebody you love. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and we need to accept that no matter what they say, that person is not allowed back into their lives. And I know for one, it's a horrible thing to witness, and it is a horrible thing to be confronted with that person who you know has nearly killed your family member, and you know, you go to somebody's house and there they are as part of the family, and you know that nothing has changed. Basically, they've been let off. I find it abominable, and I think it just needs to end. And I do find it, well, it is disgusting really that the police themselves haven't actually demanded this, and as I say, how this man was not in jail and received no therapy or treatment whatsoever for battering his partner nearly to death, and he was just allowed to re-enter that family home. I'm lost for words, and all I can say to British people is that until the government starts and the police start to act, that if you have a family member, if this is one of your family, and a family member of yours has been severely beaten, hospitalised by their partner, all of you, family and friends, you stand around that person and you do not let that partner back into their lives, and you demand that they get treatment. That's all you can do. If you love, no matter what she says or he says, no matter what they say, you know, that person needs help, and do not allow that other person back into their lives, because, you know, invariably they do repeat the abuse, and it can end really, really badly as it has ended for this family, and we need to stop this. We need to stop